Hello. I believe I'm live. All right. I will just need to do a double check real quick and then we will get started. Welcome to Summer Delight, Block of the Month, Month 1. Need to double check that I actually am live. Why is this not working? Okay, well, hopefully I'm live and hopefully you can see me. Okay, great. Thank you for letting me know. So, Summer Delight is my newest block of the month. It is a 72 by 84 inch quilt. It's a pretty big quilt. All right, so this is the finished size quilt. What we're making today, we are going to be making this really nice center block. If I can get this folded up and show you guys. Yeah. This block right here is month 1. And we're going to be making this block today. This quilt has quite a few different techniques that we would be using to construct the whole quilt. I would say this difficulty level compared to my other block of the months is probably closer towards intermediate. Some of my other block of the months are a little bit easier in terms of, you know, accuracy of piecing and just like beginner skill set. However, if you have made any of the other 3 big block of months, so that would be Barn Quilt, Lucky Stars, or Wave Pool, any 3 of those, this quilt is kind of like that next step. So there's a couple things that we're going to be talking about in terms of accuracy and a little bit more tricks and tips and tricks to make each of those blocks. But we're going to go ahead and just get started talking about what we get in the pattern. So if you get a paper pattern or if you get a PDF pattern, or you can buy the entire quilt kit. All right. So in the pattern, there are monthly instructions. So this is the pattern. You get all sorts of instructions within the pattern and it's set up by month. So if you have your pattern, we're going to be using pages 3 and 4 for this month. And on page 2 of the pattern, I give you a coloring chart to essentially put your fabric with your swatches, okay? So if you're buying a kit, let me take this out of the bag real quick. I highly recommend that you go ahead and you label each of your fabric with the corresponding letter that is in the pattern, okay? So I am making this exact quilt here. And the reason why you want to label them is so you don't get confused. There's quite a bit of pinks and purples in this quilt. The blues and the greens are a little bit easier. But that is the general idea of what we're going to be working on, okay? So, talked about labeling, talked about your fabric. Month 1, we are actually going to be using 9 of the 12 different fabrics, okay? But you're going to use a little bitty piece of each of them. We are going to be using these nice little rectangles for each of A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I of fabric, all right? So the way that we have these swatches together is you have a pink and purple, from light to dark, green light to dark, and blue light to dark. They are a little tricky on how we're going to sew them together, but we're making this little section. So we're going to first start by making our base pieces, which means we're going to sew on the long edge of each of these colorways to make a rectangle. Okay, so we have 3 rectangles of each. Ultimately, you're going to have 4 sets of the pink purple and then 2 sets of the blue greens each, okay? but I've already kind of done some prep work before that, and we're gonna go ahead and just do the demo for one of each kind during this video. If you're watching this video at a later time, please leave comments below. You can check out my blog, and I'll answer all of those questions wherever you find them. Now, we're going to sew these together on the long edge, and what we're going to be able to do is we need to make sure that we are sewing with an exact with a accurate 1/4 inch seam. Okay. Accuracy is going to be key for this block, because we're essentially assuming that we are going to make 3 strips that are 2.5 inches wide, finish at 6.5 inches. And what I'm going to go do is I'm just going to sew the 3 together and then move on to the next color and then press. It doesn't matter which way you start, light, dark. You just want to make sure that it's a gradient in one direction. So you have light to dark. And that is how you would label your colors as well. The green and the blue, I start with light to dark. The purple and the pink, unfortunately, I went the other direction. So A is the darker version, then it goes A, B, C, dark to light, D, E, F, light to dark, or D, E, F, G, H, I, light to dark. That was a little unintentional because my colors in the paper pattern, or like the pattern itself, are not really, gradients. It's like red, yellow, orange, and then it goes into a gradient color, so the pink to purple is for sure different. Okay, so now that we have our rectangles sewn, we need to now press them. And what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to press everything in one direction, and that direction is going to be towards the darker fabric the whole time. So I'm going to go ahead and press towards fabric B and then fabric A for the pink and purple rectangle. And then for the blues and greens, I'm going to go towards the darker. So for green, it's going to go towards fabric F. And then for the blues, it's going to go towards fabric I. All right, so if you're doing this with your own fabric swatches, your own fabric colors, this is the order that we go in. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I. All right. Now, we are going to be making half square triangles with white background in this case to make our nice star. Because I wanted strippy half square triangles, what we're going to do is we are going to sew a half square triangle directly on the line. And the easiest way to do that is to mark your big white rectangles on the diagonal for the triangle. Okay, so you go corner to corner, and you're going to mark these on the line. So you go ahead and mark all of your rectangles, or all of your squares to sew onto the rectangles. So for the full block, you'll end up with 4 of these sets, 2 of these and 2 of these, and you have 16 rectangles that you're going to be marking. And I totally mean to say squares. 16 squares that you're marking across the diagonal. In this case, I'm demoing with these 3, so I'm going to need 6. Okay. right, so here's where it gets a little bit tricky. And why I say this is an intermediate quilt, okay? When we are sewing these pieces together in these blocks, you want to make sure that this is an accurate 1/4 inch seam, because this width between all the strips needs to be the same as your square, okay? We are going to be making sure you look at the instructions on which way you put your triangle. Is it this direction or is it this direction? Okay, so for your pink and purples, these are going to be different than your blues and greens. All right, so your pink and purples all will go the same direction. Your blues and greens go the same direction. So ABC goes one way, D, E, F, and G, H, I go the other. So in relativeness, this is going to go middle bottom to upper right. We are going to put our square like so. When we go to the machine now, we're going to sew directly on the drawn line. Okay. This is where it gets really fun, because you get these really awesome half square triangles. Without all the fuss. Okay? So now that we've drawn, sewn on that line, we're going to cut a 1/4 inch towards the rectangle, right? Away from that half square triangle that looks like the sew. And then we're going to chop off this extra dog ear before we go and press this seam. And I'm going to press the seam away from the background, so towards the print fabrics. Like so. Okay. Now we're going to do the same thing on the other side. Put in our square, align those there, and now I'm going to sew on that edge, or that drawn line as well. The reason why we have a rectangle is because we want to account for cutting off the seam allowances. And I want to be able to give us a good little benchmark of where things are supposed to go with nice little edges without having to say, okay, yeah, you want to cut some really awkward length for your rectangles. This one is just now, you can just cut it at a normal length and then you just trim off the excess, okay? Now, why do I say this is important to know? Your seam allowances, your distances, things like that. If your block ends up being too big, meaning it's larger than your square, that means your seam allowances are too small. Okay, you need to go back through and sew a little bit more. If your 3 strips end up too small, it means your seam allowances is just over a 1/4 inch, and you probably need to unpick and sew a smaller seam allowance. In this case, I was a little off, but I think I'm okay. Okay, so we end up with these kind of 2 different pieces. Because we end up with 4 of those rectangles, you will end up with some YouTube magic, 4 of each of these. All right? 4 of these, 4 of these. Those are our units. Like I said earlier, the blues and the greens are a little different, okay? The blues and the greens sew the opposite direction than what we did the pinks and the purples. And I'm always looking at this to make sure. So same direction with ABC. This is now D, E, F. But instead of sewing this way, which is bottom left to top right, we're going to sew the other direction, right? So top left to bottom right. Okay? See that difference? And we're going to do that same thing for blue as well. Again, blue and green, identical. Pink and purples are the other direction. And we're sewing on the line. Now that we have those sewn, we're gonna again trim away towards the center of that rectangle. Make sure we have our half square triangle this direction. Okay. And we're gonna make sure that we cut off our little dog ears here. So when we press our half square triangle open, we don't have any goofiness in our seams. All right, and then we're gonna do another one on the other side, right? So we're gonna go and align our square with what's left of the rectangle and sew across that line. It's really easy now that you have half of it, because you know, like, you're not gonna put your square this way, obviously, because there's no fabric on this side. You know that it's gonna have to be parallel to the line that you just cut, like so. So we're gonna go sew those. So we have these two, and now we're going to trim yet again a 1/4 inch away from the line, like so. Cut that on this side, and then don't forget the dog ears. On these sets, again, we are going to go ahead and press away from the background. And the fun part about this is if you are slightly off, no one's going to know, because there are no matching seams for your block. Like, there's nothing about it that's going to clash or intersect with something else. All of these kind of just intersect to a solid piece. So there's no harm in being slightly off. This is probably one of the more forgiving blocks that look super precise. So in this case, you have two different greens and two different blues. Now, if you notice here, you see how the pink and purples, the lines are horizontal compared to the blues and greens where they're vertical. That's how you know that they're opposite from when you sewn the triangles on there, left, right, right, left. It ends up showing up differently in terms of perpendicular or parallel to that half square triangle. Okay, so you end up with 2 of each of green and 2 of each of purple, or of the blue, 4 of each, 4 of each. Now, these are all the units that is used in month 1. The next step is now we're going to lay this out in the 4x4 block of the main quilt, okay? So we start with fabric C on the outside, like the bigger portion of it. And this is the outer 4 corners of the quilt. That's going to look like this, okay? This one with the larger A, I'm going to move these, is going to be in the middle here. Okay. So you see that little pinwheel in the middle. These go on the outside. And then these sections on the side are the blue and green, okay? So we have the dark blue that looks like so, here and here, because you have the longer of the light blues. The longers of the dark blues are also cross from each other, like so. Darker of the long greens look like this. And then laid out our 16 units that we're going to be making into month one's block. This is a 4x4 grid, right? There's 16 blocks. And in a grid format, the way that I like to sew things together, to make sure that like halfway through I don't rotate one of these blocks the wrong way, or I don't swap one of the greens accidentally, is that I like to web piece anything that's in a grid. And what that means is I'm going to separate, or I'm going to sew things in terms of columns into rows. So I'm going to take column 2 and sew each of the pieces onto column 1. Then I'm going to cut thread, but I'm not going to cut them all apart. I'm just going to cut thread to have, you know, these two sewn together. And then I'm going to add column 3 to what I just sewn. Do that again. And add column 4 to what I just sewn. But I'm not cutting thread in between each of these chain pieces. And that helps me not rotate and not like misalign or put something in the wrong spot. And I'm going to go ahead and put column 2 over column 1. Like so, and go 1, 2, 3, 4 in the direction that I want to go sew. So I'm going to take this to the machine. I'm going to sew this side of all 4 sets. And these are just normal 1/4 inch seams. So you essentially align the center half square triangle, you know, and then sew down a 1/4 inch seam. Some of this is a little bit goofy. Part of it might be, you know, that your strip piecing wasn't quite right, something like that. I know my half square triangle on the background will be correct because I drew those lines and I sewed on those lines. So I'm following the 1/4 inch seam off the background fabric, not so much my pieced strips, just in case those were slightly off when I was sewing them together. Okay. So now that I've cut all of those apart, I'm going to go back to the front and back to the top. And now I'm going to add column 3. I'm going to open that up and add column 3. And so I'm going to take everything from top to bottom in that same orientation. So I know I'm going to add this to what I just sewed. Like so. Open up the next one. We're going to add the next block. Open up the next one. The next one, and we're going to add in the last square. All right, so now we have 4 rows of 3 blocks. We're going to take that last column and add it to the rows that we've been sewing. So top to bottom in the same orientation, to be able to add to the rows that you have just sewn. And if you're noticing here, I have not unstitched any, or not unstitched, not cut any of the chain piecing thread in the middle of the blocks or the rows. Open it up, adding the next section. And then the last one. All right, so now we have all 4 rows sewn together and they're all attached. All right. So what we're going to do now is we are going to like press our seams in alternating directions. So we are going to press them in one way. On the next row, we're going to press them the other direction and vice versa. So then when we actually sew each of the rows together, they nest with the rows that are touching it. Okay? And it doesn't matter which way you do it. I just press my rows in alternating directions. And here, you could theoretically cut your pieces in half. Meaning, you can cut rows 1 and 2 apart. And so you have a top and a bottom half. I do find that sometimes a little bit easier. Especially since this block is identical, or mirror imaged rather, on top and bottom. So it makes it pretty easy then if I cut top and bottom to say, okay, yep, I know how to put these 2 together once I sew the top and bottom 2 rows together. Okay. So we either have the top 2 rows, or if I rotate it 180, the bottom 2 rows. That did not get pressed well. All right. You just need to make sure that your seams are pressed in the same direction. Right? So that goes that way. Yep. And as long as you stay consistent right, left, you should be good to go. So now we're going to sew the 2 rows together. And in order to do that, I will take some fork pins. I use these clover fork pins to pin on either side of the seam. So I'm going to put these together and I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to match up where my seams nest. And I'm going to fork pin on either side. So these clover fork pins, you pin on either side of the seam and that will not move. I love these clover fork pins because if I sew slowly over them, or I slow, like coming up to it, I can sew directly over these pins without breaking my needle or throwing my machine out of time. You just have to not hit it at 1,000 feet per minute. Just slow down as you approach the pin, sew over the pin, and then speed back up. Okay, so I'm going to do that for the other side as well. And you know which side to sew because that's the side that has the chain piecing thread there, right? So like if I were pinning the other side, you wouldn't be able to open it because this chain piece thread is here. So you can easily check that you're sewing the correct side by which side can you actually open. Okay. All right. I'm gonna take these over here real quick. Fix that. Piece is ironing. Alright, so now I'm going to go ahead and sew the rows together on the edge that I just pinned. All right. Slow down as you get to the pin. Speed back up again. Slow down when you get to the pin to sew through it. Speed back up again. Finish that out. I'm going to sew the other half together. Slow down as you come to the pin. So you're probably noticing I'm like holding my seams down. I'm not pushing the fabric or anything through the machine at all. I'm literally just holding the two fabric seams together, or the two pieces of fabric together on the seam, so that when it gets to the machine, it doesn't actually do anything funky. All right, so I snip those apart. Now I'm going to press my seams to one direction. It doesn't matter which way. That's one half. Okay. This is the other half. And because we know this is a star, we know that these pieces go together versus the pieces going together this direction. I mean, I guess you could sew it together this way, but for this pattern, it really is making a star. So we have our pieces in the middle like so. So we're going to fold those two together, and then now we're going to align our seams, and we're going to use our pins like we did and pin these together. Okay, so fork pins again, pin on either side of the seam. Make sure that they are in. And then on the center seam, same deal. And either side of the seam. And then the last one. And now we are going to sew the two halves together. Actually, I fixed that. I didn't pin that one well enough. slow down when you get to the seams that are held by pins so you don't break your machine. Scoot back up again. So now that that seam is all sewn, we're going to go ahead and press our seams to one side. What you'll have is a finished, I think my iron is unhappy right now. It's like spitting water. What you'll have is you'll have a finished month 1 block. So, ta-da! Month 1. Now I will preface this and say the rest of the months are not quite this fast, but I usually like to have month 1 be a very quick block. So in case you want to actually get the quilt kit and sew along, you're not that far behind. So again, we will be back on the second Saturday of May, which I believe is May 14th? No, that can't be right. May 10th? 12th? What day is the second day of March? Second day of May. The second day of May is the 13th, May 13th. That was close, it was almost the 14th. So May 13th, we'll be back with month 2 of Summer Delight. I hope to see you then. And we are out for today. This is month 1. If you have any questions, drop a comment below or comment on my blog and I will get back to you as soon as possible. Again, you can pick up a pattern at my shop or a quilt kit if you want to make this exact quilt. Have a great day. Thank you.